Hi, I'm Kassy.
I'm Ian.
We did our project on genetically modified foods.
And today we're going to be talking about 10 topics, some history, some scientific backgrounds, and some pros and cons, or just some of them.
A genetically modified food is one that has a sequence of DNA from another organism inserted into its genome in order to get a desired phenotype. The definition of genetically modified foods may also include foods that have a deleted gene, foods such as cheese, that are made from enzymes that are from a genetically modified organism, and foods such as beef that have been fed genetically modified feed. Why are foods genetically modified, you may ask? Genetic engineering offers a rapid and precise method of altering organisms as compared to traditional methods that could be slow and inaccurate. Traditionally, plants and animals were selectively mated in order to get desired phenotypes. This took many generations to improve organisms.
Who's eating biotech foods? In all likelihood, you are. Most people in the United States don't realize that they've been eating genetically engineered foods since the mid-1990s. More than 60% of all processed foods in U.S. market shelves, including pizza, chips, cookies, ice cream, salad, corn syrup, and baking powder, contain ingredients from engineered soybeans, corn, and canola. In the past decade or so, the biotech plants that go into these processed foods have leaped from hothouse oddities to crops planted on massive scale on 130 million acres in 13 countries, among them U.S., Canada, Argentina, China, South Africa, Australia, Germany, and Spain. On U.S. farmland, acreage planted with genetically engineered crops jumped nearly 25-fold from 3.6 million acres in 1996 to 88.2 million acres in 2001. More than 50 different designer crops have passed through a federal review process, and about 100 more are undergoing field trials today. How is genetic modification possible? The components that make up DNA are the same in all organisms. The sequence of these components is the recipe for the protein synthesized by different organisms. Proteins are responsible for the characteristics exhibited by life forms. By taking the DNA sequence that codes for a protein responsible for a desirable characteristic and putting it into another DNA genome of another organism, the desirable characteristic will be expressed. The new sequence will begin to make the intended protein. So the Monsanto Company, a former chemical giant in the U.S., and since the 1980s has been producing genetically modified foods. Since the 1980s, they have dissolved their chemical status. They were originally founded in 1901, and they are the first company to privatize the genetically modified foods industry. Today, Monsanto has a monopoly on the genetically modified foods market, with 40% domestically and 27% globally. Being that this is a new, complicated, and expensive market to enter, a monopoly has formed and has crippled the small and mid-sized farming industry. The price of seeds over the past 15 years has risen 3 to 5 times over their equilibrium, and this rise in seeds, which mid and small-sized farmers buy, has lowered their profits. And that, coupled with the fact that they do not have the genetically modified foods ability to create mass amounts of food and product, has dwindled their profits. Even though that this is a monopoly and it is such a new industry, the fact that it is a new industry gives this market time to go back to a competitive nature and status once new firms are able to get past the patents that the Monsanto company has.
Externalities are third-party effects arising from the production and consumption of goods and services for which no appropriate compensation for a good is paid. They occur outside of the market and affect people not directly involved. This is known as a spillover market. When there is a negative externality, social costs exceed private costs. A possible negative externality for GMOs are accidental contamination between genetically modified and non-genetically modified foods. There exist many argued benefits for genetically modified foods market. The first is the easing of world hunger. These crops can be grown in marginal soil, unlike most. According to Dr. Prankosh, an agricultural scientist at the Center of Plant Biotechnology Research at Tuskegee University, 800 million people on this planet are malnourished. Scientists agree that genetic engineering can help address the problems of food shortage and world hunger, since it can increase crop yields, offer crop varieties that can resist pests and disease. Genetically engineered crops can persist through weather conditions that most crops cannot. The second is reduced strain on non-renewable resources. There is a development of drought-resistant crops, development of salt-tolerant crops, and the development of crops that make more efficient use of nitrogens and of other nutrients. The third is reduced of pesticides and herbicides. There is a development of pest-resistant crops, and reduced herbicide use is better for the environment and also reduces the cost for farmers. The fourth is an improvement in crop quality. There's a development of frost-resistant crops, development of disease-resistant crops, and the development of flood-resistant crops. The fifth is improved nutritional quality, for there is a development of foods specifically designed to meet nutritional goals. There exist 6 major risks and cons for genetically modified foods. The first is that insects may develop resistance to pesticide-producing GM crops. The second is herbicide-tolerant crops may cross-pollinate weeds, resulting in superweeds. The third is certain gene products may be allergens, thus causing harm to human health. The fourth is that there may be an unintended harm to wildlife and beneficial insects. The fifth is that it is a very expensive technology to produce. And the sixth is the risk of invasiveness.
The main risk associated with genetically modified foods is the risk of invasiveness. The release of GEOs highlights the general difficulty in predicting the occurrence and extent of long-term environmental effects when non-native organisms are introduced into the ecosystem. Non-indigenous species have been introduced into the United States intentionally and unintentionally for centuries. An estimated 50,000 species in the United States are not native. While many non-indigenous species are regarded as harmless or beneficial, other introduced species, commonly referred to as invasive species, have spread widely in their non-native ecosystems and cause unintended degradation of natural ecosystem functions and structure. Invasive species are also expensive, costing the United States an estimated $137 billion annually in direct and indirect effects. Genetic modifications through traditional breeding or genetic engineering of crop or other species can potentially create changes that enhance an organism's ability to become an invasive species. Although genetic engineering transfers only short sequences of DNA relative to a plant's entire genome, the resulting phenotype, which includes the transgenic trait and possibly accompanying changes in traits, can produce an organism novel to the existing network of ecological relationships. Potential ecological impacts through invasiveness depends on existing opportunities and unintended establishment. Persistence and gene flow of an introduced organism, each of these, in turn, depends on various components of survival and reproduction of an organism or its hybrids. Few introduced organisms become invasive, yet an issue for the management of all introduced organisms, including GEOs, is how to identify those modifications that may lead to or augment invasive characteristics.
Genetically modified products are generally cheaper. This is because they are capable of yielding more fruits and grains than non-genetically modified plants. For example, a genetically engineered rice plant can yield 5 times more grain heads than non-genetically modified rice plants. This is a vast difference. Also, some genetically modified plants are capable of resisting against these diseases and pests. Farmers don't need to use pesticides nor herbicide. These pesticides and herbicides are very costly and are a financial burden on farmers, especially those in poor countries. So then, this is why they use genetically modified crops. They save extra money by not having to purchase these chemical substances. With this extra cash, farmers can plant more crops and plants than usual, which equals to a bigger harvest. Hence, supplies of these crops will increase, meaning the prices are inclined to reduce. A bigger supply plus the same demand will equal to lower prices for consumers.
is the fact that genetic engineering is almost totally under the control of multinational corporations.
Like Monsanto and whatnot?
Sure. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just, Monsanto's the number one.
Yeah.
But there's also Syngenta, there's Cargill gets involved, Bayer. All right, so why am I concerned about that? Because at their absolute core, corporations are utterly amoral. By regulations, they are required to maximize return on investment to their stockholders.
Yeah.
The CEO who spends money on improving people's health or helping the environment will be fired almost immediately unless they can demonstrate that the warm fuzzies from this will make people think better of the corporation and result in increased sales. Like for years,
there's much potential in genetically modified foods. However, in order for them to live up to this potential, they need to restructure their markets and return to a competitive status in order for them to help world hunger and better the lives of others.
The biggest mistake of all would be to either blindly reject or fully endorse this technology. We must be able to analyze the risks and the benefits of how, why, and where we are introducing genetically modified goods. It is then that we could introduce them to markets who need them most.